Hello and welcome to Shadow of Sherlock, where every story feels like a conversation. Over a warm cup of coffee today, I bring you a brand new Sherlock Holmes. Mystery filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable. And let's unravel the case together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from now. Let's get started. Chapter 1. It was in the biting chill of an autumn morning that the case first came to us. A case so utterly baffling that even Scotland Yard, for all its faults, could scarcely be blamed for faltering. The sun, a pale and indifferent spectre behind the veil of London's ever-present fog, did little to warm the streets as I made my way back to Baker Street, eager to share the morning's news with Sherlock Holmes. The Times had dedicated its front page to the most peculiar of headlines: The Westminster Mystery. Inspector Ashton found dead in a locked office. No signs of entry or exit. The name alone sent a shiver through me. Inspector Gregory Ashton was no ordinary officer. He was one of Scotland Yard's finest minds, a man Holmes had once, with uncharacteristic generosity, deemed competent. That he should meet his end in such inexplicable circumstances was deeply unsettling. I arrived at 221B Baker Street to find Holmes in his customary position, sprawled upon the settee, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gaze fixed upon the ceiling. The morning's newspaper, its edges crisply folded, rested upon the arm of his chair, confirming that he was already acquainted with the mystery at hand. "You have read the news, I see," I began, settling into my own chair by the hearth. "Indeed, Watson. It is a case of singular peculiarity," he murmured. "Inspector Ashton found dead in his locked office at Scotland Yard. The door was bolted from the inside, the windows secured, and yet he was strangled. No sign of forced entry, no weapon, no struggle. Quite the conundrum." "A locked-room mystery, then?" I asked, leaning forward. "Locked-room mysteries are often less about the lock and more about the illusion of impossibility, Watson," Holmes replied. "The question is not how he was killed, but why someone went to such lengths to make it appear impossible." I pondered this as Holmes reached for his pipe, striking a match with absent-minded precision. Lestrade is, no doubt, floundering. "As is his nature," Holmes mused. "I expect he shall be at our doorstep within the hour." As if summoned by the very words, the heavy tread of boots ascended the stairs, followed by an urgent rap upon the door. Mrs. Hudson's familiar voice proceeded. "Inspector Lestrade to see you, Mr. Holmes." Lestrade entered, his face drawn with frustration. "You've seen the papers, I take it?" he asked without preamble. "Indeed," Holmes said, "and I assume Scotland Yard has concocted a theory both convenient and incorrect." Lestrade bristled, but he had known Holmes long enough not to take offence. "It's baffling, Holmes. Ashton was found at his desk, his body slumped forward, hands frozen in place, as though grasping at something that wasn't there. No marks on his throat, yet every sign suggests he was strangled. No sign of forced entry. No one could have gotten in or out." He hesitated, his voice lowering. "And there's something else, something we're not sharing with the public." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Go on." Lestrade hesitated. A note was found on his desk. It was blank, completely blank, but we suspect it was left by the killer. Holmes sat up abruptly, his interest now fully piqued. A blank note? Fascinating! Watson, we must go at once. Scotland Yard is rather inept at deciphering messages written in invisible ink. Lestrade sighed but led the way. As we stepped into the fog-laden streets, I could not shake the feeling that we were about to unravel something far greater than a mere murder. And judging by the glint in Holmes's eyes, he already suspected the same. Little did we know that this was but the first thread in a web of deception far more intricate than we could have imagined. Chapter 2. We arrived back at Baker Street just as a fine drizzle began to mist the air, the dampness clinging to our coats. Holmes, ever impervious to the trivial discomforts of weather, strode ahead with an eager briskness, his mind already racing ahead of us all. Lestrade followed, his expression a mix of irritation and reluctant admiration. Mrs. Hudson met us at the door, with her usual frown of disapproval at our untimely arrivals. But before she could chide Holmes for dragging Scotland Yard into her respectable lodgings yet again, another voice cut through the air, one laced with desperation. "Mr. Holmes, you must help me!" The man who spoke stood just inside the threshold of our sitting-room, his posture tense, his face ashen. He was young, no more than 30, but the deep lines on his brow and the nervous way he wrung his hands spoke of a man who had seen far too much in too little time. His well-tailored suit was of excellent make, yet slightly dishevelled, as though he had dressed in haste. Holmes removed his coat with deliberate calm, tossing it over the arm of his chair before fixing the man with his piercing gaze. "You did not come here of your own accord," Holmes stated, studying him with a calculating look. "You were sent." The man flinched. How did you—" Holmes waved off the unfinished question and motioned for him to sit. "You were hesitant to come, yet you arrived before we returned, meaning you were instructed to find me post-haste. Your shoes, still damp, indicate you arrived in a hurry, likely in a hired cab. Yet your cuffs bear the faint scent of ink and parchment, suggesting you are a man of letters rather than action. A solicitor, perhaps?" The man swallowed hard. "Yes. My name is Edward Langley. I work for Hewitt & Sons, legal representatives of the late Inspector Ashton." Lestrade let out a low whistle. His own solicitor. This just got even more interesting. I took my seat across from Langley, watching as he struggled to compose himself. His fingers tapped against his knee, a nervous rhythm that betrayed his unease. "What brings you here, Mr. Langley?" Holmes asked, though I suspected he already had some inkling of the answer. Langley hesitated. "There is something Scotland Yard does not know. Something about Inspector Ashton's affairs that may be connected to his murder." He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a sealed envelope, setting it on the table before Holmes. "This was delivered to our offices 2 days ago, before the inspector's death." Holmes leaned forward, his long fingers lifting the envelope, with a kind of reverence reserved only for the truly curious. The paper was thick, expensive, yet slightly crumpled, as though it had been handled too much. The seal, an official wax imprint from the law firm, remained unbroken. Holmes turned it over in his hands. "You have not opened it." Langley shook his head. It was meant for Inspector Ashton's eyes only. His voice dropped to a whisper, but he never lived to read it. I felt a chill creep into my bones. The implications were obvious. Someone had ensured that the inspector would never lay eyes on whatever that letter contained. Holmes made no move to break the seal. Instead, he placed the envelope carefully on the table and steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "Tell me, Mr. Langley, before we proceed further, had Inspector Ashton expressed any concerns to you? Any indication that he feared for his life?" Langley hesitated, glancing at Lestrade as if uncertain whether to speak in his presence. "You may speak freely," Holmes assured him. "Inspector Lestrade is less of a fool than he appears." Lestrade scowled, but said nothing. Langley exhaled sharply. "Inspector Ashton came to our offices a week ago. He was troubled, deeply so. He had drawn up a legal document, one he insisted remain confidential unless something should happen to him." I stiffened. "A will?" Langley shook his head. "No, a confession." A silence fell over the room, thick with the weight of unspoken horrors. Holmes's eyes glinted with something unreadable. "A confession to what?" he asked softly. Langley's fingers clenched around his knee. "I don't know. He refused to tell me outright. But he did say one thing before he left." Langley's voice dropped to a near whisper. "The walls at Scotland Yard have ears, Mr. Langley, and I fear they do not belong to friends." Holmes exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he broke the seal on the envelope. I leaned forward, breath held, as he unfolded the letter and scanned its contents. His eyes moved quickly, too quickly, before he suddenly stopped, his grip tightening on the page. "Holmes?" I prompted, unease creeping into my voice. For a moment, he did not answer. Then, with a slow, measured tone, he read aloud the single line scrawled across the page. "I have found it, but I am not the only one." A shudder ran through me. There was no signature, no explanation, just those words, an ominous whisper from a dead man. Holmes set the letter down, his gaze distant. "Gentlemen," he said at last, "it seems we are not merely dealing with a murder." Lestrade frowned. "Then what are we dealing with?" Holmes looked up, his sharp gaze locking onto mine. "A conspiracy, Chapter 3. The word conspiracy hung in the air like an unspoken curse, wrapping its unseen tendrils around our thoughts as we absorbed the gravity of Holmes's statement. I had seen him solve cases of murder, theft, even political intrigue, but the way his fingers now drummed against the arm of his chair spoke of something far more complex. Lestrade, though not a man easily shaken, was visibly uneasy. "A conspiracy? Holmes, you can't possibly mean—" Holmes cut him off with a sharp look. "I mean precisely what I say, Lestrade. Whatever Inspector Ashton uncovered before his death was important enough for someone within Scotland Yard to silence him. He tapped the letter that lay on the table between us. "I have found it, but I am not the only one. That suggests he was in possession of knowledge that others sought. Dangerous knowledge, and now that knowledge has disappeared along with him." Langley, still seated, shifted uncomfortably. "Then what do we do?" Holmes stood abruptly, his movements filled with restless energy. "We go to Scotland Yard. The crime scene will tell us what Inspector Ashton's final moments could not. Lestrade gave a slow shake of his head. I don't like it, Holmes. If you're right, if there is someone inside the yard working against us, then walking in there asking questions might not be the wisest course of action. Holmes allowed himself a thin smile. Which is precisely why I intend to ask the wrong questions, and observe who reacts too strongly. The journey to Scotland Yard was brisk and silent, save for the rhythmic clatter of carriage wheels against cobbled streets. Holmes remained absorbed in thought, his fingers absently tracing the edges of the letter, while I struggled to shake the uneasy feeling that we were walking into something far larger than we understood. Upon our arrival, Lestrade led us through the halls with a wary glance over his shoulder, as though half expecting unseen eyes to be watching. Inspector Ashton's office was a simple affair. A desk, a bookshelf lined with legal volumes, a filing cabinet, and a single oil lamp that had long since burned out. The air was thick, stale, the way a room feels when its occupant has departed unexpectedly. Holmes stepped inside, and with a flick of his hand motioned for us to remain silent. His gaze swept the room in a slow, deliberate arc, absorbing details that to the untrained eye would seem inconsequential. The door was locked from the inside, Lestrade murmured, pointing to the heavy brass bolt. No sign of forced entry. Window latched shut. No one came in or out. Holmes did not respond. Instead, he crouched by the desk, his fingers brushing lightly over the surface. And yet, he said softly, Inspector Ashton was strangled. Curious, isn't it, Watson? I frowned. Strangled? But you said there were no marks on his throat. Precisely. Which means he was not strangled in the traditional sense. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing his magnifying glass, and studied the desk's surface with great care. Ah, as I suspected. I stepped closer. What is it? Holmes straightened, holding up a single slip of paper. It was nearly identical to the letter Langley had delivered to us, save for one crucial detail. The ink had faded, as though it had been exposed to something that had caused it to vanish. Invisible ink, Holmes murmured. This confirms my suspicion. Ashton was attempting to conceal information even from those he trusted. Lestrade exhaled sharply. And now that information is gone. Wonderful! Holmes smirked. Not entirely, Lestrade. You see, invisible ink is not truly invisible. It merely waits to be revealed. He reached for the oil lamp on the desk and, with a practised motion, adjusted the flame. Holding the paper close, we watched as faint letters began to appear, forming into words. Holmes read them aloud. Not safe. Key hidden inside. He stopped abruptly. His sharp eyes scanned the desk once more before his hand moved with sudden purpose, pressing against one of the wooden panels. There was a faint click, and a small compartment slid open, revealing an ornate brass key nestled inside. Watson, he said softly, holding the key up to the light. We have just found the very thing Inspector Ashton died protecting. Lestrade paled. But what does it unlock? Holmes turned the key over in his palm. That, Lestrade, is what we must now discover. But one thing is certain. Ashton was not the only one searching for it. A sudden sound echoed from the hallway, a faint scuffling of boots, the whisper of movement. Holmes's expression darkened. "We are not alone," he murmured. I tensed. "Someone's been watching us." Holmes slipped the key into his pocket. "Then let us ensure they do not see where it has gone." I turned toward the door, half expecting an intruder to burst through at any moment. But the hallway remained empty, its shadows stretching long and silent. Holmes met my gaze. "Come, Watson. The true hunt begins now." Chapter 4a. Hush had fallen over Scotland Yard, yet the silence was deceptive. I could feel it, the presence of unseen eyes, the whisper of movement just beyond the threshold of Inspector Ashton's office. Someone had been watching us, listening, waiting for a misstep. Holmes, however, remained unperturbed. He adjusted his coat with deliberate ease, his expression betraying nothing of what he had just uncovered. "We must take our leave," he murmured, slipping the brass key into his pocket as though it were of no consequence. Lingering any longer would be unwise. Lestrade hesitated, glancing toward the empty hallway. "You think someone's been tailing us?" Holmes's smirk was razor-sharp. "Oh, I do not think it, Lestrade. I know it." His gaze flickered toward the door. "Come, Watson." I followed him swiftly into the corridor, my pulse quickening as I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing but shadows stretched beyond us. No footsteps followed. No figures lurked in the dim gaslight. And yet, I could not shake the oppressive weight of unseen company. Holmes, however, was unconcerned. "Let them watch," he murmured under his breath, "for they will find themselves looking precisely where I want them to." We stepped outside into the mist-laden streets, the damp air curling around us as the great iron gates of Scotland Yard loomed behind. Holmes flagged down a waiting hansom cab, his movements brisk but unhurried. "Where to?" Lestrade asked warily, stepping in beside us. Holmes leaned back against the worn leather of the seat, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Baker Street." "That's it," I pressed. "You uncover a hidden key, find a cryptic message, and simply decide to retire for the evening?" Holmes's lips twitched at the corners. "Oh, Watson, you should know me better than that." The carriage jolted forward, and for a long moment we rode in silence, the rhythmic clatter of hooves against cobblestone, the only sound between us. Holmes, I could see, was retreating into the vast recesses of his mind, his eyes half-lidded in that peculiar trance he often adopted when piecing together the fragments of an unsolved puzzle. I could bear it no longer. "Holmes, you know what that key unlocks, don't you?" A flicker of amusement danced in his gaze. "I have a theory, Watson, but theories are mere castles in the air without proof to ground them." I frowned. "Then tell us the foundation." Holmes exhaled, his gaze shifting toward Lestrade. Inspector Ashton was no fool. He knew his life was in danger, and yet he did not run. He stayed within Scotland Yard, despite suspecting a traitor within its ranks. "Why?" Lestrade folded his arms. "Because he was trying to uncover them." Holmes nodded. "Precisely. And more. Importantly, he had already found something. His letter tells us as much. I have found it, but I am not the only one." Holmes tapped his fingers against his knee, his mind working swiftly. If he had simply discovered corruption, he would have taken it to the press or higher authorities. But he didn't. He hid his findings. He locked them away. And the key, I murmured. Holmes withdrew it from his pocket, turning it over in his palm. It is no ordinary key, Watson. Look here, the crest engraved upon its bow. You recognize it? I leaned in, squinting. It was faint, worn down with time, but unmistakable. A small emblem in the shape of a crown, with a crossed sword and quill beneath it. I started. That's an official government seal. Lestrade let out a low whistle. What in the devil was Ashton keeping that required a key from the Crown? Holmes smiled thinly. That, my dear Lestrade, is precisely the question we must answer. The cab pulled to a stop outside 221B Baker Street. As we disembarked, Holmes cast a casual glance at the street behind us, his expression betraying nothing. Yet I knew him well enough to recognize the subtle satisfaction that gleamed in his eyes. Someone followed us, I murmured under my breath. Yes, Holmes replied simply. Are you not concerned? On the contrary, Watson, I find it rather useful. We entered the warmth of our lodgings, Mrs. Hudson barely sparing us a glance as she set out the evening tea. Holmes wasted no time, striding toward his desk and retrieving a collection of old newspaper clippings, spreading them out before us. Now then, he mused, let us see how far this rabbit hole truly goes. Lestrade sighed. Holmes, you're expecting to find the answer in a pile of old newspapers. Not the answer, Lestrade, but the pattern. Holmes's fingers moved swiftly, separating various articles, placing them in what seemed like no discernible order. I recognized them at once. Cases of missing government officials, unexplained resignations, men who had vanished from public life overnight. Look at the dates, Holmes murmured. Look at the locations. I scanned the clippings. Each article was separated by only a few months, each disappearance tied to a different department of the government. Finance, security, foreign affairs. And then I saw it. My God, I breathed. Each of these men had ties to Scotland Yard. Holmes's smile was cold, and each of them disappeared before they could speak. Lestrade ran a hand through his hair. You're saying Ashton wasn't just killed to keep him? Quiet. Holmes's gaze darkened. No, Lestrade. He was killed because he was the last loose thread in a scheme that has remained hidden for years. A sudden noise from the street below made us all freeze. The distinct clink of glass, the shuffling of boots. Holmes moved swiftly to the window, peering through the curtains. Ah, he murmured. It seems our watchers have grown impatient. I tensed. Who is it? Holmes turned back to us, his expression unreadable. It appears, Watson, that we are no longer the hunters in this game. A single gunshot rang through the night. Chapter 5. The gunshot sent a shockwave through the still night air, the unmistakable crack shattering the fragile silence that had enveloped Baker Street. I sprang to my feet, my instincts honed from years of service as a military doctor. But Holmes had already moved. With a swift, fluid motion, he extinguished the lamp on his desk, plunging the room into darkness. "Down, Watson!" he hissed. Lestrade, less accustomed to such immediate peril, hesitated for half a second too long. Holmes grabbed his shoulder and dragged him to the floor just as another shot whistled through the window, shattering glass and embedding itself into the wooden panelling. For several moments all was silent. My breath was coming quickly, and I could hear the distant sound of hurried footsteps retreating into the night. Holmes moved first, rising with careful precision and peering through the broken window into the street below. A shadow flitted past, the gas lights disappearing into the fog. "Too late," he murmured. "They're gone." Lestrade exhaled sharply, still crouched behind Holmes's chair. "Good Lord, Holmes! Are we under attack now?" Holmes turned to him, his expression unreadable. "Not we, Lestrade. That was a warning shot." He gestured toward the bullet lodged in the wall. Had they intended to kill, they would have. No, this was a message, a reminder that we are treading dangerous ground. I rose cautiously, brushing glass from my sleeve. "Who are they?" Holmes crossed the room in long strides, retrieving the brass key from his coat pocket and studying it once more beneath the moonlight. "A question, Watson, to which we must now provide an answer." Lestrade stood, still shaken. "Well, they certainly don't want us looking any further, which only means we should." He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I'll admit, Holmes, this is bigger than anything I've dealt with before. If there's truly someone inside Scotland Yard involved in this," Holmes nodded, "then the usual methods will be of no use to us. This must be played carefully." He turned to me, his expression shifting into something sharper, more deliberate. "Watson, I need you to accompany me." "Where to?" I asked. Holmes tapped, the key against his palm. "To where this leads." We left Baker Street under cover of darkness, moving swiftly through the gaslit streets of London. Holmes was silent, his eyes fixed ahead as though already seeing what lay at our destination. Lestrade had returned to Scotland Yard, under Holmes's strict instruction to act as though nothing had changed, to behave as if we had found nothing, so as not to alert the enemy within their ranks. Our carriage rattled through the narrow roads, until at last Holmes ordered it to halt outside a grand yet unremarkable building nestled between a bank and an unassuming tailor's shop. The structure bore no sign, no markings of ownership. Holmes stepped out, slipping the key into his pocket. "This, Watson, is the Lion's Archive, a private records hall used by select government officials." I frowned. "I've never heard of it." Holmes smirked. "Precisely." We ascended the steps, and Holmes rapped sharply on the iron door. For a moment, nothing. Then, with the slow creak of rusted hinges, the door inched open, revealing an elderly man with sunken eyes and an air of quiet authority. "Mr. Holmes," the man said, his voice like brittle parchment. Holmes inclined his head. "Good evening, Mr. Fairchild. We require access to the restricted vault." Fairchild studied him for a long moment before his gaze drifted to me. "And the doctor?" Holmes smiled faintly. "He is here to ensure I leave in one piece." The old man nodded once and stepped aside, allowing us entry. Inside, the air was thick, with the scent of old paper and candle wax. Shelves stretched high, filled with ledgers and documents bound in faded leather. Holmes moved with purpose, leading me toward the farthest wall, where a reinforced metal door stood embedded in the stone. He withdrew the brass key, holding it up to the dim candlelight. "This," he murmured almost to himself, "is what Inspector Ashton died protecting." With a slow, deliberate movement, he inserted the key into the lock and turned. The mechanism clicked, The door creaked open. We stepped inside. Rows of wooden crates lined the chamber, each labelled with precise, government-issued lettering. Holmes scanned them swiftly before his gaze landed on one in particular. He strode forward, lifting the lid. Inside, a collection of documents lay undisturbed, save for one missing file, its absence marked by a handwritten note. Holmes plucked it from the crate, holding it close as he read. I saw his expression shift, ever so slightly. "Holmes," I prompted. He handed me the note. "The truth is not buried. It is waiting, and we are watching." A chill crept through me. This means someone has already been here. Holmes nodded. "Not just someone, Watson. Them." He reached into the crate, retrieving a single remaining document. Opening it, he scanned its contents with growing intensity. Then, softly, he exhaled. "This, Watson," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "changes everything." I stepped closer, looking over his shoulder. The first line of the document sent a shock through my very bones. Classified report, Scotland Yard Internal Corruption Inquiry. At the bottom of the page, two signatures stood out in crisp black ink. The first, Inspector Gregory Ashton. The second, an unknown sigil, one that bore a striking resemblance to the crest on Holmes's brass key. I swallowed. "Holmes, do you understand what this means?" He closed the file carefully, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Watson." I waited, but he said no more. Instead, he simply turned and replaced the crate's lid. "What do we do now?" I asked finally. Holmes glanced toward the open door, the candlelight flickering in his eyes. "Now, Watson," he murmured, "we set the trap." Chapter 6, Holmes's Declaration. "Now, Watson, we set the trap," lingered in my mind as we made our way back to Baker Street. The weight of what we had uncovered at the Lyons Archive pressed heavily upon me. A classified inquiry into corruption within Scotland Yard, signed by Inspector Ashton before his death, a missing document taken by unseen hands, and a warning: the truth is not buried, it is waiting, and we are watching. Who were they? And how many of them lurked unseen within the very institutions sworn to uphold justice? Holmes, as always, gave no indication of doubt or hesitation. He sat opposite me in the cab, his long fingers drumming against his knee, his gaze distant. He was deep in thought, constructing his next move, threading each piece of evidence into an intricate web that only he could fully perceive. At last, unable to bear the silence, I asked, "Holmes, what exactly is the trap you intend to set?" His gaze flicked to me, sharp as a dagger. "Patience, Watson. The bait must first be properly placed before the predator reveals itself." I frowned. "And what is the bait?" Holmes allowed himself a thin smile. "The truth, Watson. Or at least, the illusion of it." Before I could press him further, the cab jerked to a sudden halt, nearly throwing me forward in my seat. Holmes sat upright at once, alert. A commotion stirred outside, the voices of constables cutting through the night air. We had stopped in front of Scotland Yard, and something was terribly wrong. Holmes was the first to disembark, moving with the unhurried yet purposeful stride of a man already aware of what he would find. I followed closely, my gut twisted with a sense of foreboding. Lestrade met us at the entrance, his face grim. "Holmes, you're too late." "Too late for what?" Holmes asked, his voice disturbingly calm. Lestrade exhaled. "There's been another murder." A sick feeling took root in my chest. "Who?" Lestrade's jaw tightened. "One of our own. Sergeant Michael Hewitt. He was found in his office just minutes ago." I exchanged a glance with Holmes, and I saw it. The flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He had expected this. "'Cause of death?" he asked. Lestrade hesitated. "Same as Ashton. No signs of struggle. No wounds. Just dead." Holmes turned to me. "Come, Watson. There is no time to waste." Hewitt's office was smaller than Ashton's, tucked away at the end of a dimly lit corridor. A single gas lamp flickered against the walls, casting long, wavering shadows. Hewitt sat slumped at his desk, his head bowed as though he had simply fallen asleep. But the unnatural stillness, the eerie calm that clung to the air, spoke of a far more sinister truth. Holmes stepped forward, his keen eyes scanning every inch of the room. Nothing disturbed, no sign of forced entry. Lestrade nodded. Door was locked from the inside, just like before. Windows bolted. Holmes crouched beside the body, his fingers lightly brushing against Hewitt's sleeve. Then, with sudden intensity, he lifted the sergeant's hand, inspecting the fingertips. "Aha! What is it?" I asked. He held up Hewitt's fingers. A faint, almost imperceptible smudge of white powder clung to them. "Poison," Holmes murmured. "A subtle one, absorbed through the skin." Lestrade blanched. "You mean he was murdered without even knowing it?" Holmes straightened. "Precisely. The same method was likely used on Ashton. No violence, no struggle, only a quiet death, designed to leave no trace." I frowned. "But why him? Why now?" Holmes's gaze darkened. "Because Hewitt knew something. Or worse, because he was about to speak." Lestrade ran a hand through his hair. "We need to find out what he was working on." Holmes's eyes flickered toward the desk. "Indeed, and we need to do so before his murderer returns to erase the evidence." We tore through Hewitt's files, scanning every document, every note scribbled in the margins of official reports. It was clear he had been working on something outside of his official duties, something unsanctioned. And then Holmes found it. Single sheet of parchment, hidden beneath a false bottom in one of the desk drawers. A hastily scrawled note, much like Ashton's. "If anything happens to me, follow the trail. It begins where the first mistake was made." Holmes read the words, aloud, his brow furrowing. Cryptic, but not without purpose. Hewitt understood the danger he was in. This is his final message. I exhaled. But what does it mean? Holmes was silent for a moment. Then he turned to Lestrade. "Who was the first man involved in Ashton's original corruption inquiry?" Lestrade blinked. I don't know. The file is missing." Holmes's lips curved into something resembling satisfaction. "Exactly, Lestrade. And that is our answer." Lestrade frowned. "What are you saying?" Holmes lifted the note. Hewitt was telling us that the key to this entire mystery lies with whoever's name was erased from the files. The first person Ashton investigated. The one Scotland Yard and our unknown adversaries want us to forget. I felt the hairs on my neck rise. But Holmes, if his name was erased, how do we find him? Holmes met my gaze. We do not need to find him, Watson. He tapped the parchment. We need to find his mistake. A long silence followed. Lestrade looked between us. You mean you want to go digging through the old classified cases? The ones Scotland Yard wants to forget? Holmes smiled thinly. Oh, Lestrade, I don't want to. I must. Lestrade exhaled sharply. And if we're caught? Holmes's expression was unreadable. Then we shall know for certain that we are on the right path. Gid tucked the note into his coat. Come, Watson, the real game is about to begin. Chapter 7. We left Scotland Yard under the cover of darkness, slipping into the streets like shadows. Holmes was deep in thought, his eyes glinting with a cold intensity that I had seen only a handful of times before, times when he knew he was on the precipice of revelation, when the truth was just within reach, and all that remained was to seize it before it slipped away. Lestrade, walking briskly beside us, exhaled sharply. I don't like this, Holmes. If you're right, if someone within Scotland Yard is behind this, we're walking straight into their hands. Holmes smirked. On the contrary, Lestrade, we are leading them exactly where we want them. I frowned. And where is that, Holmes? He tapped his coat pocket, where Hewitt's final note rested. Back to the beginning. Our destination was an unassuming records office, a small building nestled in the bureaucratic heart of London. It was a place where old case files were stored, forgotten evidence, faded testimonies, the skeletal remains of past crimes buried beneath the weight of newer injustices. Holmes picked the lock with practised ease, and we slipped inside. The room was dimly lit by the glow of gas lamps, casting eerie shadows along the towering shelves of documents. Dust clung to the air, disturbed only by our presence. Lestrade exhaled. Right, and what exactly are we looking for? Holmes did not hesitate. He strode forward, his gaze sweeping over the labels of old case files. The erased man Lestrade, the one Inspector Ashton was investigating before all records of him were removed. I swallowed, glancing over my shoulder. The silence here was oppressive, heavy, as though we were not alone. But there was no one, only rows upon rows of old secrets waiting to be unearthed. Holmes's fingers halted over a particular drawer. He pulled it open, rifling through its contents with precision. Then he froze. His sharp intake of breath sent a chill through me. "What is it?" I whispered. Holmes turned, holding a single document in his hands. The name on it was faded, barely legible, but I could still make it out. Reginald Phelps. Lestrade frowned. Never heard of him. Holmes's eyes darkened. That is precisely the point. He flipped open the file, scanning the contents rapidly. Then, in a voice devoid of emotion, he read, Reginald Phelps, former Treasury officer, dismissed under suspicion of financial misappropriation. Charges never proven. Case abandoned due to insufficient evidence. Subsequent whereabouts unknown. Stu felt my stomach tighten. Lestrade shook his head. And you think this is what Ashton was investigating before he died? Holmes did not answer immediately. He was staring at something else in the file, a single handwritten note at the bottom of the page. If I disappear, look for the watchers in the dark. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Holmes shut the file with deliberate care. "It appears, gentlemen, that Reginald Phelps did not merely disappear. He was erased." As we left the records office, Holmes was already deep in thought, piecing together the final fragments of the puzzle. I could sense it, that moment of absolute clarity before the inevitable revelation. We reached Baker Street just as the first hints of dawn bled into the sky. Mrs. Hudson, ever observant, eyed Holmes warily as he strode into the sitting-room. Without a word, and immediately lit his pipe. Lestrade leaned against the mantel. "Well, Holmes, what's the connection?" Holmes exhaled a slow curl of smoke. His eyes narrowed. Reginald Phelps was not a mere financial officer. He was a fixer, a man who handled delicate matters for powerful individuals, a man whose name was meant to be forgotten. I felt a chill creep through me. "And you believe he was the key to Ashton's murder?" Holmes inclined his head. "Not just Ashton, Watson. All of them." Lestrade exhaled sharply. "You mean this isn't just about Scotland Yard, is it?" Holmes's smile was razor-sharp. "No, Lestrade, it is about power, control, and the careful elimination of those who knew too much." A sudden sound outside made us all freeze, a soft shuffle of footsteps, then a single knock at the door. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And it would seem we are no longer the only ones searching for answers." I reached for the revolver I kept in the desk drawer, my pulse quickening. Holmes stood, adjusting his coat. "Shall we see who has come to? Call Watson." He moved to the door and opened it. Standing in the dim gaslight was a man I had never seen before, tall, composed, and with eyes that held the quiet menace of someone who was entirely unafraid. Holmes smiled. "Ah, Mr. Phelps, I presume." The man inclined his head. "You've been looking for me." Holmes stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Indeed, and I believe you have a story to tell." Phelps walked in, his movements measured. Gaze swept over the room before settling on the document still resting on Holmes's desk. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "They never really destroy the records, do they?" he murmured. "They only hide them, hoping no one will look too closely." Holmes nodded. "Which begs the question, who exactly are they?" Phelps' expression darkened. "They are the ones who pull the strings behind the curtains, Mr. Holmes. The ones who decide which men live and which men disappear." He met Holmes's gaze. "And I am afraid you are dangerously close to stepping into their line of sight." Holmes exhaled. "Then I do hope they are watching closely." A sudden noise erupted from the street below. A carriage moving too quickly. A shout, then the unmistakable crack of a gunshot. I barely had time to react before Phelps stiffened, his eyes going wide. He staggered forward, a dark bloom spreading across his chest. Holmes caught him before he hit the floor. Phelps' fingers clutched at Holmes's coat. His lips moved, a whisper barely audible. Holmes leaned in, a final gasping breath. Then nothing. I swallowed hard, my own heart pounding. "Holmes?" Holmes's face was unreadable as he rose, his hands stained with blood. He turned to me, his expression eerily calm. He told me where to find them. Lestrade exhaled. "Then tell us, where?" Holmes's gaze flickered toward the darkened window, the echoes of the gunshot still lingering in the cold morning air. He smiled. "Oh, Lestrade," he murmured, "I rather think they will find us." Chapter 8 Pelp's body lay motionless on the floor, his lifeblood staining the wooden boards of 221B Baker Street. Outside, the sound of hooves retreating into the night faded into silence. Whoever had fired the shot had no interest in being seen. Lestrade cursed under his breath, rushing to the window, but Holmes did not move. He remained crouched beside Phelps, his sharp gaze fixed on the dying man's lips, as though willing them to move once more, to whisper just one more secret, before it was too late. But there was nothing. The silence was absolute. Lestrade spun around. "Damn it, Holmes! He was our only lead." Holmes exhaled slowly, his fingers hovering just over Phelps's wrist, as though measuring the seconds that had slipped away with his last breath. Then, without a word, he reached into Phelps's coat pocket, a single slip of paper, folded twice over. Holmes retrieved it with careful precision, holding it up to the dim light of the gas lamp. The message was written in a hurried, slanted hand. Six. Brotherhood meets where the first oath was taken, beneath the Iron Crown. Holmes smiled faintly. "Our lead is not lost, Lestrade. If anything, it has just been confirmed." I frowned, my heart still pounding from the sudden violence. "Holmes, what does it mean?" He stood swiftly, slipping the note into his own coat. "It means, Watson, that our adversaries are not mere criminals hiding in the shadows." His expression darkened. "They are something far more dangerous." Lestrade stepped away from the window, his face grim. "A secret society." Holmes nodded. "Indeed, and if Phelps's words are true, they are a brotherhood that has existed long before Ashton's murder, perhaps long before Scotland Yard itself." A long silence stretched between us. Lestrade swallowed. "And beneath the Iron Crown? What does that mean?" Holmes reached for his coat, already preparing to leave. "It means our next destination is the only place in London that fits such a description." I stiffened. "You don't mean—" Holmes glanced at me, his eyes gleaming with purpose. "The Tower of London, Watson, where the first sworn officers of the Crown once took their oaths." The tower loomed before us, like a spectre from the past, its stone walls drenched in the pale glow of moonlight. Few places in London held as much history, and even fewer harboured as many secrets. Holmes led the way through the outer gates, moving with the confidence of a man who knew exactly where he was going. Lestrade and I followed in silence. The only sounds our footsteps against the damp cobblestones. "Holmes," I murmured, "this place is guarded night and day. If this brotherhood truly operates from within, how do you intend to reach them without alerting every sentry?" Holmes smirked. "Oh, Watson, I do not intend to reach them." He glanced at Lestrade. "They shall reach us before I could question him further." Holmes stopped abruptly before an ancient iron gate, half hidden in the shadows of the outer bailey. The structure bore no markings, no sign that it led anywhere significant. Yet Holmes moved with certainty, brushing his fingers over the rusted metal before glancing back at us. "This gate leads to the crypt beneath Wakefield Tower," he murmured, "a place seldom visited except by those who know its true purpose." Lestrade inhaled sharply. the crypt, but that is the meeting place," Holmes finished for him. A sudden sound broke the silence. The unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. "Very astute, Mr. Holmes." I turned sharply, my breath catching as figures emerged from the shadows. They moved without sound, their faces obscured by the dim light. But their presence was unmistakable. Silent, disciplined, like men who were accustomed to the weight of power. One man stepped forward. He was older, his hair silvered at the temples, but his posture was that of a soldier. His piercing gaze settled on Holmes with something akin to amusement. Few men have ever come so close to our door uninvited. His voice was smooth, deliberate. Fewer still have lived to regret it. Holmes tilted his head. "Ah, I was beginning to wonder if your brotherhood was as elusive as the legends claim." The man chuckled. "You flatter us." He gestured to the crypt entrance. "Come, it is time you learned the truth." The chamber beneath Wakefield Tower was ancient, the air thick with the scent of stone and damp earth. Candles flickered along the walls, casting elongated shadows across the floor. At the centre of the room stood a circular stone table, its surface etched with symbols that I did not recognize. Seated around it were half a dozen men, each of them watching us with quiet scrutiny. Holmes strode forward, unshaken by the weight of their gaze. "I presume you are the ones who orchestrated the removal of Inspector Ashton?" The older man smiled. "We do not orchestrate such things, Mr. Holmes. We simply correct them." My stomach twisted. "You admit to killing him?" The man's expression did not change. Ashton was a man who stumbled upon a truth he was never meant to see. He gestured toward Holmes. "As have you." Lestrade bristled. "You think you're above the law?" The man's smile was almost pitying. "We are the law, Inspector. We have been since before you ever held your badge." Holmes exhaled. "And Phelps?" The man's eyes darkened. Phelps was a fool. He thought he could dismantle something far greater than himself. Holmes nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You have ruled from the shadows for decades, perhaps centuries. You dictate which men rise and which men fall." The man inclined his head. "You understand, then, why we cannot allow you to leave?" A long silence stretched between them. Then Holmes smiled. "Oh, I expected as much." Before the man could react, Holmes reached into his coat and withdrew a pocket watch. He flicked it open, revealing a concealed mechanism inside. A faint click. From above, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the crypt. Lestrade grinned. "You see, we knew you'd be watching us." He stepped forward. "And we also knew you'd be arrogant enough to believe we had come alone." A door burst open, and armed guards stormed the chamber. Officials from Scotland Yard and the Queen's Guard, rifles raised. The older man's smile finally faded. Holmes exhaled. "You are not the first secret society to believe yourselves untouchable." He gestured to the soldiers. "And you shall not be the last to fall." The men around the table tensed, but they did not resist. They knew it was over. Lestrade stepped forward, his voice cold. "You are all under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and obstruction of justice." The older man chuckled. "And do you truly believe this ends here?" Holmes met his gaze. "No, he admitted, "but it is a start." Later that night, as we sat once more in the warmth of 221B Baker Street, I exhaled deeply. "Do you think we have truly stopped them, Holmes?" Holmes was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Then, softly, he murmured, "No, Watson, we have only pulled one string from the tapestry." His gaze flickered towards the darkened streets below. "And I fear we have only glimpsed the edge of what lies beneath." Chapter 9. The embers in the fireplace had burned low, casting long, flickering shadows across the sitting room of 221B Baker Street. Lestrade had departed hours ago, triumphant in the arrests made beneath the Tower of London. But Holmes remained, silent, his sharp eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window. For once, victory did not bring satisfaction. I poured a measure of brandy into a glass and placed it before him. "You should rest, Holmes." He did not move. "Do you truly believe, Watson, that we have cut the head from the serpent?" I hesitated, knowing better than to offer simple reassurances. "We have done what we could," I said carefully. "The men we caught were the ones who orchestrated Ashton's death, the ones who have manipulated Scotland Yard from the shadows for years. That is no small victory." Holmes exhaled slowly, his fingers steepling beneath his chin. "No, Watson, that is merely the illusion of victory." A silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. Holmes reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the note recovered from Phelps's body. He held it up, his gaze flickering over the words. "The Brotherhood meets where the first oath was taken, beneath the Iron Crown." He set the paper down with careful precision. "Tell me, Watson, what is missing from this note?" I frowned. "Missing? It led us to the society beneath the tower, did it not?" Holmes exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "No, Watson, it led us precisely where we were meant to go." A cold shiver ran through me. "You think it was a trap?" Holmes nodded. "A carefully laid one. We were allowed to uncover the society, to expose its members and ensure their removal from power. But tell me, who benefits from that?" I hesitated, thinking back to the men we had arrested. The so-called Brotherhood had shown no fear, even as the Queen's Guard had taken them into custody. The older man, the one who had spoken with such unsettling certainty, had even smiled. A realization crept upon me. "Holmes, what if they wanted to be caught?" Holmes's lips pressed into a thin line. "Precisely, Watson." He leaned forward, his voice quiet but taut with intensity. "Consider the timeline. Ashton was murdered, but his body was left to be discovered. There was no attempt to truly conceal the crime. Phelps was assassinated only after delivering his message to us. Hewitt was silenced just as we began investigating. The moment we moved too close to the truth, all of the loose ends were neatly tied." The implications sent a chill through me. Someone wanted us to uncover the Brotherhood, someone who knew they were no longer useful. Holmes nodded. "And that, my dear Watson, is the true mastermind." I swallowed hard. "Then we haven't solved the case at all." Holmes's expression darkened. "No, Watson, we have merely played our part in a far grander scheme." A sudden knock at the door shattered the quiet. Holmes and I exchanged a glance. He rose smoothly to his feet and crossed the room in 2 strides. With a measured hand, he unlatched the door and pulled it open. A man stood in the threshold, tall and composed, his face half hidden by the brim of a dark hat. He did not enter, nor did he flinch under Holmes's gaze. "I do apologize for the hour, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice refined, clipped, "but I had hoped to speak with you before the night was through." Holmes studied him for a long moment. "And whom do I have the pleasure of addressing?" The man smiled. "My name is of no consequence. But if you must call me something, let us say I am a custodian of sorts." Holmes stepped aside, gesturing him in. "How fortunate! We were just speaking of matters left untended." The man entered, his gaze flickering to me before settling back on Holmes. He removed his hat, revealing sharp, patrician features, the kind of face one might see in Parliament or among the nobility. He took a seat without invitation. "You have done well, Mr. Holmes. You have uncovered a conspiracy decades in the making. Quite an achievement." Holmes settled into his chair, his fingers steepling. "I suspect you are not here to congratulate me." The man's smile did not falter. "No, I am here to offer you a warning." I stiffened. "A warning?" His gaze flickered toward me, amused. "You are a good man, Dr. Watson, loyal to your friend, but you have stepped into affairs that extend beyond mere detective work." Holmes did not react. "Go on." The man exhaled slowly, as though considering his words carefully. "The men you arrested tonight were useful, but they were not essential. Their removal was inevitable. They had grown careless, exposed themselves to scrutiny, and so they were allowed to fall." I felt my breath hitch. "Then, yes," the man interrupted gently, "your victory was given to you." A sick feeling settled in my gut. By whom? The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. By those who remain unseen. Holmes leaned forward slightly. "And you are here to ensure we remain blind to them." The man tilted his head. "No, Mr. Holmes. I am here to ensure you live." A heavy silence fell over the room. The man rose, adjusting his coat. "You are an intelligent man, Holmes. You must know that the truth is not a single thread, but an entire tapestry. You have pulled at one loose string, but there are others, ones that should remain undisturbed." Holmes's expression remained unreadable. "And if I do not heed your warning?" The man's gaze turned to me, and for the first time I felt the weight of something truly menacing behind his polite veneer. "Then there will be consequences." Holmes stood as well, his smirk returning. "You mistake me for someone who fears consequences." The man chuckled. "No, Mr. Holmes. I mistake you for someone who values his friends." The air seemed to grow heavier. I swallowed hard. Holmes's voice was dangerously soft. "Is that a threat?" The man simply smiled. He placed his hat back atop his head and turned toward the door. "A courtesy, Mr. Holmes. Nothing more." With that, he stepped into the night, vanishing into the mist. For a long time, neither Holmes nor I spoke. At last, I broke the silence. "Holmes, do you think he was telling the truth?" Holmes exhaled, his fingers drumming against the arm of his chair. "Partially." I frowned. "And which part was the lie?" Holmes's gaze flickered toward the window, to the empty streets beyond. "The part where we are meant to stop," He reached for his pipe, lighting it with slow precision. "We have uncovered the puppet strings, Watson," he murmured. "Now we must find the hand that pulls them." A chill ran through me. "And if we do—" Holmes's expression darkened, the ember of his pipe glowing in the dim light. "Then, my dear Watson, we shall learn just how far the shadows truly stretch." Chapter 10. The man had left us with an unspoken ultimatum, his presence lingering in the room like the scent of extinguished candle smoke. His words, spoken with such calm certainty, had not been a mere warning. They had been a promise. Holmes stood by the window, staring into the fog-shrouded streets below, his expression unreadable. I knew him well enough to recognize the moment when his mind was alight with possibilities, when every word spoken, every movement made, was being dissected and reconstructed in his thoughts. I broke the silence. "Holmes, if what he said was true, if we've only seen the outer shell of this conspiracy, then we are precisely where we need to be, Watson," Holmes interrupted, his voice quieter than usual. He turned from the window, his piercing eyes locking onto mine. "The difference between a web and a tapestry, my dear fellow, is that a web is spun to ensnare, while a tapestry is woven to deceive." I swallowed hard. "And which do you believe we are caught in?" Holmes exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the mantelpiece. "A deception, Watson, one grander than I first suspected." He strode across the room, retrieving the note from Phelps's body once more. His fingers traced the words carefully. "The Brotherhood meets where the first oath was taken, beneath the Iron Crown." "It was never about the Brotherhood," he murmured almost to himself. "They were a layer, nothing more. A distraction, a convenient sacrifice." I frowned. But if they were simply a layer, who is at the core? Holmes's lips curled into a faint smirk. "That, Watson, is the question I intend to answer tonight." Ridicule, I could respond. There was a sharp tap at the window. Lestrade. Holmes opened the pane, allowing the inspector to climb into the sitting-room with far less grace than he likely intended. He straightened his coat with a huff. "Blasted fog, Holmes! If I end up with pneumonia because of this, you'll be hearing from my doctor." Holmes barely acknowledged the complaint. "You have news?" Lestrade's expression darkened. "More than news. The men we arrested beneath the tower. Half of them were released within the hour." I stiffened. "Released? On whose orders?" Lestrade rubbed a hand over his face. "No official ones. They simply vanished. No records, no documentation. They were taken before they could be questioned." I turned to Holmes, expecting anger, but there was only quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "Of course," he murmured. "Of course." Lestrade scowled. "I don't see what's so amusing about it, Holmes. These men are still out there, and I'll wager they weren't too pleased about being exposed." Holmes turned, retrieving his coat and hat. "Then it is fortunate that we know exactly where to find them." Lestrade blinked. "We do?" Holmes was already at the door. "Come, gentlemen, we are expected." The carriage ride through the city was silent, save for the faint clatter of hooves on cobblestone. Holmes gave no further explanation, offering only an address scrawled hastily on a slip of paper. When we arrived, I felt an immediate unease. The building was grand, a towering structure of marble and stone, its facade untouched by time. No sign adorned the entrance, but Holmes walked with the certainty of a man who had already solved the riddle before stepping inside. A man awaited us in the lobby. He was tall, immaculately dressed, his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was neither hostile nor welcoming. Holmes inclined his head slightly. "I assume we are permitted to enter." The man nodded. "You were invited, Mr. Holmes. Right this way." We followed him through dimly lit hallways, lined with oil paintings and statues of men whose names I did not know, but whose faces spoke of power. The air smelled of old parchment and cigar smoke. At last we entered a great chamber, a circular room with a long polished table at its centre. Several men sat in silence, their faces calm, composed. There was no fear here, no surprise. Holmes took his seat without hesitation. Lestrade and I remained standing. A man at the head of the table spoke first. "You are not a man who wastes time, Mr. Holmes, so I will not waste yours." He leaned forward, his fingers laced. "You wish to know who we are?" Holmes exhaled slowly. "I already do. The question is whether you wish for me to speak it aloud." A flicker of amusement passed through the man's eyes. "And what, pray, do you believe us to be?" Holmes's voice was quiet, but carried through the room with the weight of undeniable truth. The architects of London's justice. The unseen hand that directs the course of law, not by enforcing it, but by determining who is subject to it. The man inclined his head. "Very good, Mr. Holmes." I inhaled sharply. "You control Scotland Yard." "Not control, Doctor," the man corrected gently. "We guide. The law is a delicate thing. It is not always just. It is not always fair. But it is necessary. And in order for it to function, there must be those who ensure that it remains intact." Lestrade stiffened. "By committing murder?" The man turned his gaze to him. "By ensuring that the law serves its intended purpose." Holmes's expression remained unreadable. "You overplayed your hand. You thought eliminating Ashton would end the matter, but his paranoia led him to take precautions. Precautions that, in turn, led us here." The man nodded. "Indeed, a miscalculation, and one that we have already begun to correct." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" The man smiled faintly. "What I mean, Dr. Watson, is that this is where we part ways." A movement at the doorway caught my eye. Two men stepping inside, their hands resting lightly on the hilts of concealed weapons. Lestrade stiffened, reaching for his own firearm, but Holmes did not react. Instead, he simply leaned back in his chair. "You forget," he murmured, "that I am not the one caught in a web." The doors behind us swung open. More footsteps, but this time they were not our enemies. Uniformed officers flooded the room. Scotland Yard's finest. The men at the table barely reacted. The leader exhaled, shaking his head. "You are persistent, Mr. Holmes." Holmes stood, adjusting his coat. "And you, sir, have grown complacent." The arrests were swift, silent. These were not men who begged or protested. They knew, as Holmes did, that the game had only shifted, not ended. As we left the building, Lestrade let out a long breath. "Do you think that's the last of them, Holmes?" Holmes smiled faintly. Oh, Lestrade, the true masters never sit at the table. I turned to him. Then what have we done? Holmes's eyes flickered toward the darkened cityscape. We have set the board for the next game, Watson, and this time. His voice was quiet. They will not see me coming. And with that, Sherlock Holmes stepped into the night, his silhouette swallowed by the shadows. Chapter 11. The streets of London stretched before us, bathed in the dim glow of gas lamps, their flickering light barely piercing the thick fog rolling in from the Thames. We had delivered a powerful blow to the unseen forces that had manipulated Scotland Yard, yet Holmes remained unsatisfied. His pace was brisk. His silence weighted with the knowledge that the true mastermind had yet to reveal themselves. Lestrade, still catching his breath from the night's events, finally spoke. "Well, Holmes, I hope you're satisfied. We've arrested some of the most powerful men in the city. I imagine even you didn't expect such a result when this all began." Holmes did not break stride. "On the contrary, Lestrade, I expected precisely this result." I frowned. "Then why do you seem so unsettled?" Holmes exhaled sharply, adjusting his coat against the chill. "Because, Watson, we have not yet played the final move, and our opponent, whoever they are, knows it." Lestrade scoffed. "You mean to tell me that after all this, there's still someone higher up the chain?" Holmes stopped abruptly, turning to face us both. His eyes burned with an intensity that sent a chill through me. "You do not understand, Lestrade. There is no chain. There is only a circle." Lestrade paled. "You mean—" "I mean," Holmes said grimly, "that every man we have arrested tonight is replaceable. The true mastermind is not someone who operates from a single position of power, but rather someone who exists above it, untouchable, unseen, and unaffected." The realization settled upon us like a weight. The game had never been about removing. The villains one by one. It had been about drawing out the only player who mattered. Holmes straightened. "And that is precisely what I intend to do." We arrived back at 221B Baker Street just as the first hints of dawn kissed the horizon. The air was still, as if London itself was holding its breath. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with her usual frown of disapproval at our late-night escapades, but said nothing as she retreated to her quarters. Holmes moved with purpose, retrieving a small envelope from the inside of his coat. While we were inside the Brotherhood's chamber, I found something unusual. He tossed the envelope onto the table. I picked it up, noting that it was made of thick, expensive parchment. Lestrade leaned in. "And what's inside?" Holmes gestured for me to open it. I did so carefully, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The message was short, written in precise, deliberate strokes. "You have seen what we allow, nothing more." The three of us stared at it, the weight of those words settling over us. Lestrade muttered a curse. "So they were expecting us." Holmes smirked. "They did not expect me, Lestrade. They expected a detective. But they fail to understand that I am something quite different." I swallowed hard. "Holmes, what does this mean? Are they watching us even now?" Holmes's eyes flickered toward the window. "No, Watson, they are waiting." A knock at the door shattered the silence. Lestrade's hand flew to his revolver. I stood frozen. Holmes, however, merely smiled. "Ah, right on time." Without hesitation, he strode to the door and pulled it open. A man stood on the threshold. He again was older, dressed impeccably, with an air of quiet authority that made even Lestrade stiffen. But his most striking feature was his eyes, calculating, assessing, unreadable. He stepped inside without waiting for permission. "Good evening, Mr. Holmes." Holmes inclined his head. "I was wondering when you would make your entrance." The man took a seat, folding his hands in his lap. "You have been meddling in affairs that do not concern you." Holmes chuckled softly. "Oh, but you see they do. Scotland Yard is the foundation of order in this city, and someone has been treating it as their personal chessboard." The man gave a slow nod. "And what do you intend to do about it?" Holmes leaned forward. "What I always do. Find the truth, expose it, and let the pieces fall where they may." The man smirked. "That is precisely why I am here, Mr. Holmes. To make you an offer." Silence. Holmes raised an eyebrow. "I do not accept bribes." "Oh, this is not a bribe." The man's expression remained unreadable. "It is an invitation." I stiffened. "To what?" The man's gaze shifted to me, then back to Holmes. "To understanding. You have seen the outer layers of power. You have glimpsed the strings, but you do not yet know the hand that pulls them." Holmes exhaled, tapping his fingers together. "And I suppose you would be willing to educate me?" The man smiled. "Indeed, but it is not a lesson I offer lightly. There is no going back from it." Lestrade bristled. "And what if he refuses?" The man's smile did not fade. "Then we will go back to the way things have always been. We'll continue solving your little crimes. We will continue ensuring that the world functions as it must." A pause. Holmes's expression remained unreadable. "I do enjoy a challenge." The man stood adjusting his coat. "Then you know where to find me." Without another word, he turned and walked out the door. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, I exhaled. "Holmes, you're not seriously considering—" "I am considering everything, Watson." Holmes's voice was quiet, but his eyes burned with a dangerous curiosity. "We have uncovered a great deal, but the greatest secret of all remains untouched." Lestrade scowled. "Then leave it alone. We've done enough. You keep pulling at this, and they will bury you." Holmes turned to the window, watching the fog settle over London's rooftops. "They may try." A silence stretched between us. Finally, I forced out the question that had been clawing at my mind. "Holmes, do you think this goes beyond London?" Holmes did not turn from the window. "Oh, Watson!" His voice was soft, almost reverent. "This does not begin in London." A chill ran through me. Holmes's gaze flickered to the envelope on the table. "This is only the beginning." And with that, he turned back to the night, already seeing the next move before it was made. Chapter 12a. Deep silence hung in 221B Baker Street after the mysterious man had departed, his invitation lingering in the air like the smoke from Holmes's ever-present pipe. The weight of his words settled upon me like an oppressive fog, an unspoken challenge left for Holmes alone to answer. Lestrade, still pale from the encounter, paced before the fireplace. Holmes, you can't seriously be entertaining this madness. These men don't just manipulate power. They are power. If you push them further, they will erase you. Holmes remained by the window, his gaze fixed on the darkened city beyond. That, Lestrade, is precisely why I must push further. I exhaled sharply. Holmes, listen to reason. We have done our part. We have uncovered the corruption, exposed the brotherhood beneath the tower. Is that not enough? Holmes turned to me, and the look in his eyes sent a chill through my bones. Enough, Watson. He let out a dry chuckle. You and I have been playing on the surface of a game we barely understand. These men, whoever they are, do not fear exposure, because exposure means nothing to them. They have built a world where the truth is irrelevant, where justice bends to their will. And if we walk away now, we become complicit in their illusion. Lestrade sighed. And what do you intend to do? Accept his invitation? Walk willingly into their den and ask politely for the answers? Holmes smiled thinly. No, Lestrade, I intend to make them show their hand. The last gambit began the next evening. Holmes vanished into the city alone, offering no explanation, and leaving me with nothing but the gnawing weight of uncertainty. When he finally returned, his coat was damp from the mist, and there was something unreadable in his expression. This have taken the bait, Watson. I frowned. Bait! Holmes smirked. If one wishes to lure a predator, one must first offer them something they cannot resist. Lestrade folded his arms. And what precisely have you offered them? Holmes exhaled slowly. A ghost. A silence stretched between us. Lestrade scowled. You're enjoying this too much. Holmes did not deny it. Tonight, at the stroke of midnight, we shall meet them at the place they believe to be their sanctuary. I tensed. The tower? Holmes shook his head. No, Watson, the place where this truly began. He tossed a slip of parchment onto the table. It was an address, one I recognized instantly. Scotland Yard. We arrived at Scotland Yard just before midnight, slipping through the back entrance under the cover of darkness. The station was silent, the gas lamps burning low. Lestrade led us down a corridor, our footsteps barely making a sound against the stone floor. Holmes was uncharacteristically quiet. His hands were clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. And then, without a word, he stopped. A single door stood before us. It was unmarked, as though it had been forgotten. But Holmes had not forgotten. Inside, he murmured. Lestrade hesitated. Holmes, what? But Holmes had already opened the door. The room beyond was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of old paper and candle wax, and there, seated at a long wooden table, were 3 men. The man from Baker Street sat at the centre, his sharp eyes gleaming with amusement. Mr. Holmes, he said smoothly. Right on time. Holmes stepped inside, his expression unreadable. You said you wished to teach me. I am here to learn. The man chuckled. Very good. Then let us begin. Lestrade and I followed reluctantly, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. Holmes took his seat across from the man, his gaze steady. Tell me, he said quietly, who truly governs London? The man's smile did not waver. London, is an organism, Mr. Holmes. It thrives because of balance. There are those who move in the light, your inspectors, your magistrates, your politicians, and there are those who ensure that balance remains intact. Holmes's expression darkened by erasing men like Ashton, like Phelps. The man exhaled. Men like them disrupt the balance. Ashton sought to uncover things best left untouched. He thought he was a player in this game when, in truth, he was merely a piece. I clenched my fists. And what of Phelps? What of those who vanished? The man's smile faded. Some men serve a purpose in life. Others serve it in death. A cold silence settled over the room. Holmes's fingers drummed against the table. And me? What purpose do I serve? The man leaned forward. You, Mr. Holmes, are an anomaly, a mind that sees too much, that moves too quickly. It is fascinating. Holmes smirked, flattered. The man exhaled. That is why you were given a choice. To walk away, to leave this world behind. Holmes tilted his head. And yet you knew I would not. A pause. The man's smile returned. No, which is why I am prepared to offer you another choice. He reached into his coat and withdrew a sealed envelope, sliding it across the table. Holmes did not touch it. And what, pray, does this contain? A truth you are not prepared to know, the man said softly. One that will change everything. Holmes was still. I exhaled. Holmes, don't! But he had already broken the seal. He unfolded the parchment, his eyes scanning the contents. And then his expression changed. For the first time in all the years I had known him, I saw something in Holmes I had never seen before. Shock. His fingers tightened around the paper, his jaw clenched. Took a step forward. Holmes, what is it? But he did not answer. The man stood, adjusting his coat. You understand now, don't you? Holmes exhaled, his gaze still locked onto the document. Slowly, he set it down. Yes, he murmured. I reached for the paper, but in a swift motion, Holmes lifted it and tossed it into the fire. Holmes, I shouted. The flames devoured the paper, its secrets turning to ash before my eyes. Holmes turned to the man. His expression was once again unreadable. Our conversation is over. The man smiled. Indeed. He tipped his hat, turned, and walked into the night. I turned to Holmes, my heart pounding. What was written on that paper? Holmes met my gaze, and then he did something I never expected. He looked away. A silence stretched between us, heavy and final. And in that silence, I realized something. For the first time in his life, Sherlock Holmes had seen a truth he wished to forget. I swallowed hard. Holmes, what have we uncovered? Holmes exhaled, retrieving his pipe with steady hands. Nothing, Watson. The embers in the fireplace flickered. The city outside remained unchanged, but something had shifted, and I knew, without a doubt, that Sherlock Holmes would never speak of it again. The case was closed, but the game was far from over.